Hey everybody, today is Monday, May 16th, 2022. Coming up on the show today, from Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, editor Tia Nolan.
It's a different way of looking at horror because you want to build out those jump scares, you want to build out those beats, but you still have to have fun with those characters. How do we approach this with heart, but also not so much that we're holding back from what this character is to this movie? And how do you do it so that you don't anger the fans, but you still stay true to the character of the movie? That's the trickiest thing with anything that is part of a long-running series, is that you don't want to disappoint the fans, but you also want to tell your own unique story.
Yes, all that and a lot more in this edition of The Rough Cut. Okay, what is up, true believers? Good to see you again. Thank you, as always, for checking out the podcast, and I guess what would be part 2 of our journey into the MCU. Yes, last week it was Moon Knight. We had a lot of fun with that one, and our guests Ahmed, Joan, and Cedric, and you want to make sure to give that a listen when you can. Now, one of the many interesting things about that project is that none of the characters in it had been previously introduced into the MCU. So it was kind of a fresh start of sorts for that team, and they had the challenge of building a whole new world to introduce that story. Not so for what we're talking about today. No, with Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, editors Tia Nolan and Bob Murawski, along with director Sam Raimi, had to pick things up where previous MCU projects had intersected. And those specifically would be WandaVision and Spider-Man No Way Home. And Loki too, I guess. All of them served to introduce the concept of the multiverse, and in the case of WandaVision and No Way Home, put the characters of Doctor Strange and Wanda Maximoff on a collision course for the events that take place in Multiverse of Madness. And I'm not even going to try to give you more context than that, because in almost any Marvel project, there are so many interconnecting pieces and ties to characters that don't even appear in the film, it makes it pretty difficult to explain. And now we have a multiverse, where the same character can exist in different iterations at the same time. It's madness, I tell you, which I guess explains the title. So who do you get to handle the madness in any film or TV show? Well, the editors, you know that. Here to help us today with that is Tia Nolan. Throughout her career, Tia has worked with her own multiverse of projects and directors, names like James L. Brooks, Richard Donner, Nora Ephron, Mike Nichols, the Russo brothers, and now Sam Raimi. Obviously, Tia is an editor who is comfortable in any universe, and I'm excited to have her here on The Rough Cut for the very first time to tell us about herself, her career, and her experience on Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. But before we do, let me tell you about two great powers in our own universe. First up is our longtime sponsor and good pals at Extreme Music. Who are they? Well, your basic A-list talent-driven production music company that creates and licenses music for use in TV, film, advertising, and online media. And when they say A-list talent, they mean names like Hans Zimmer, Trent Reznor, and a bunch of other great artists who don't even have a Z in their name. So get on over to extrememusic.com for your next project and dig into their vast catalog of production music from the best of the best. All you got to do is a little keyword search on things like instruments, genre, speed, vocals, era, mood, composer, any little details you have in mind for your story. They will give you back tracks and various links with whatever instrumentation you need. You can even search for music that sounds like a reference track you give to them. All that power in one simple-to-use website where you can do all the licensing online or get a little help from one of their reps at an office nearest to you. So the next time you need the best production audio out there, check out extrememusic.com. Someone else you need to know are the good folks at Massive. They're the only name you need to know when it comes to cloud-based media moving. Massive, spelled M-A-S-V, is a file-sharing solution for today's busy post-professional who's tired of data caps and searching for FedEx tracking numbers. Yeah, that's you, right? And for you, Massive offers a secure file transfer solution that can move terabytes of data over the cloud. Yes, other cloud-based solutions put a cap on what you can send, and you don't like that. I know you. Plus, as a member of the Trusted Partner Network's roster of vendors, you can rest easy knowing that Massive is a proven service that not only protects against data breaches, but also integrates with your favorite cloud storage providers like OneDrive, Google Drive, Dropbox, Iconic, and others. You do not need a subscription to sign up or some crazy server you have to cobble together. No, all you do is just pay as you go at 25 cents per gigabyte. And I'll tell you, if you sign up for Massive today using massive.io/the-rough-cut, you can get 100 gigabytes free towards your transfer. You know, after all these months of telling you that, I just did the math. 100 gigabytes free for a service that's 25 cents per gigabyte? That's $25 you save. Not bad. Okay, while you're thinking about how to spend that $25 you just saved, I'll bring on our special guest today. From Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, here's editor Tia Nolan.
Yeah.
And a lot to talk about there. I mean, you must be I assume you're taking a bit of a break.
Yes, taking a bit of a break, definitely decompressing. I mean, still, this week has been the premiere. Then we had a cast and crew screening. We took our crew out for dinner. Tonight's opening night, so it's still going. It's still very present. But now at least is the week where you can be proud of it, be excited for it. Even going to these screenings once, the baby's out in the world, going to the premiere and cast and crew, I'm still nervous. I'm like, oh, wait a second, that doesn't sound right. This is a different theater. It's boomy. Why aren't they laughing? Why'd that guy go to the bathroom? It's all that kind of stuff.
You never stop being an editor, even when the movie's out there.
I know.
A recurring theme that I saw in a lot of the reviews is that Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is Marvel's first, as they called it, horror film. And it's not necessarily for younger fans, and that, director Sam Raimi's background in the macabre sort of is really felt in the film. I mean, you even have Bruce Campbell from his Evil Dead movies making a cameo, albeit a comedic one.
Yes.
But I'm really curious to get your take on that. When you were making it, did it feel like you were really leaning into something resembling a horror movie?
I feel like we were leaning into a Sam Raimi movie. And so it's horror with a wink, with a smile, with a joke. There is, unlike the more popular, let's say, Conjurings and all those kind of like horror movies that are out today, it's not pure just you're going to live in a scary place for this entire 2 hours. It's absolutely you're going to live on a roller coaster in the most fun, and every once in a while you're going to jump out of your seat. And so it's a different way of looking at horror because you want to build out those jump scares, you want to build out those beats, but you still have to have fun with those characters, and you still have to not get to a place where you're so scared of your lead characters or what they're going into that you lose your audience, because it's still a Marvel movie. It's still a comic book.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's the perfect answer, that I felt like I was making a Sam Raimi movie. What did you talk about, you and co-editor Bob Murawski talk about with Sam in terms of his vision for the film?
I think there was a ton of conversations about all of it. Bob, being Sam's longtime editor, was definitely in on the ground floor, whereas I came in as maybe a week before they started shooting. So a lot of the development conversations before they started the film, I was not privy to. So I kind of jumped in and said, these guys are geniuses, and whatever they say, have at it. I'm just going to jump in and try and help see their vision through. But then we did, as we started the film and got into sequences that hadn't been as fleshed out, we were still doing storyboard stuff. We were still doing, I'm sure you've talked to all the Marvel editors about previs and trying to map out what scenes would look like. That's when we were able to get into some of those conversations of, and I want to say it wasn't really an approach of, oh, we want to make this scary, or we want to do, Sam was never saying, I want to do the Sam Raimi approach to this. It's just his instincts for things certainly guided that way, and his amazing ability to move that camera and create angles that you don't see normally in movies, and, wild push-ins and things like that. It's what he does. It's his nature.
So you weren't there, as you said, in sort of the early development, but when you read the script, and you just mentioned there were sequences or sections like, okay, we've got some work to do here. When you read the script, what were your first impressions? And was there anything in it that stood out to you as, okay, this might be a challenge, or this could be something where we need some extra time or some reworking?
I think my biggest reaction, and the script I read is very different from what you've seen on screen, as is the case with a lot of these things. But my biggest reaction was, and no spoilers, everybody, the Wanda storyline. And how do we approach this with heart, but also not so much that we're holding back from what she is, what this character is to this movie? And how do you do it so that you don't anger the fans, but you still stay true to the character of the movie? So that's the trickiest thing with a Marvel movie or anything that is part of a long-running series, is that you don't want to disappoint the fans, but you also want to tell your own unique story. So that was a big point of conversations early on. That was definitely my concern. I am a mother. I could certainly feel all the feels for the Wanda character and what she was going through. And I wanted to make sure that we always had an eye on that and respecting it, protecting it, but not backing away from where she was going to go, but also doing our best not to make her into a cartoon or a stereotype. And that was, that is definitely challenging when you want to show some of the levels that she gets to. She's an amazing, wild character in this movie.
Yeah, no question. A complex character. There's a lot of complex characters in this MCU, and you are not a complete stranger to the MCU, having done, I believe, additional editing on Avengers Endgame.
Yes.
Was that experience a factor for you joining this film? Or I guess I should just cut right to the chase and say, what were the events leading to you getting this job?
Well, I do think that I spent 4 months on Endgame, and I was able to basically, I called myself the baby nurse. They were trying to get Infinity War out into the theaters. They were working around the clock. And I am very good longtime friends with Jeff Ford, who edited that film, with Matt Schmidt. And they needed somebody who could edit stuff that hadn't been cut yet for Endgame and start to polish and shape and create at least a rough workable cut, because these movies, you have to get them to the visual effects vendors before you were even done shooting. Like, you just have these crazy deadlines for everything. And if you don't have things polished and discussions early on, you'll really just run, like the train will just run off the track. So I was able to work with the Russos, with Jeff and Matt, and I guess came in doing good work and really not trying to have an ego about it or make it my own or, any kind of crazy fan stuff or anything. I just blended in, did the work. Everybody was happy. So I think after that, Marvel was trying to get me on a number of their projects and timing didn't work out. Then hit a global pandemic and we're all in our homes, and they called and said, how about now? And luckily I was available. And of course, there was no way, even if I wasn't available, Sam Raimi, I'm jumping ship on whatever I am on, and I'm coming over. Hopefully those other directors aren't listening to this right now. I would never jump ship on any of you guys. I love everybody.
Well, even though it's only officially been 2 films at this point, and you're not a lifer like our friend Jeff Ford or Dan Leventhal, where you've got 12, 13 Marvel films under your belt, is there something, or some things rather, specific about the Marvel films that you're attracted to?
I think that would start with my kids. They have loved these movies this whole entire time. I think a lot of times I would find myself working. I've got a daughter who's now 19 and a son who's 16. But from early on, I would be at work and my husband would take them to these comic book movies. And I, as you probably know from my history, I'm basically dialogue comedy gal. Not to say that I don't enjoy these movies, these roller coaster rides, but I don't think I was following them in such a way as my kids. And so then when Endgame came about, I turned to my son and he became my Marvel walking wiki. And I said, who are these people and what is the timeline and where do I go? What's the best way for me? I think I was hired 3 weeks before I started. And I said, Max, what's the best way for me to figure out everything I need to know? Because I'd asked Jeff and he said, oh, watch this movie and this movie. That's really all you need. But I knew Endgame was about all their characters and all their separate journeys. So I wanted to be able to know everything and know why these characters were at this particular place in their journeys. And so my son helped me and a lot of fan sites helped me. And I watched, I think, most of the movies except for the ones that I knew best, which is fascinating if you ever get a chance to watch them all and just see over the 10 plus years, things that were set up so early on that you're like, how in the world did they know that they were going to this place?
It's crazy.
Yeah.
There are 3 in particular, obviously this is the second Doctor Strange film, but it's sort of the confluence of, you mentioned the Wanda character. This comes on the heels of WandaVision and Spider-Man No Way Home. And I think also Loki, because the multiverse concept happened in there.
Yeah.
So you sort of looked at this as sort of a homework assignment in a way, like I'm going to go back and study those films to be better prepared to jump into this particular film?
Well, this particular film, I think I rewatched some of my favorite Sam Raimi's just to kind of get a sense of his style and rhythm again. And I, because of Endgame, really knew the characters we were, about to watch yet again. I had watched I'm a huge fan of the first Doctor Strange movie, so I'd watched that a number of times more recently, and I think I did watch it again before jumping onto here. But WandaVision wasn't out yet. And I'm pretty positive Michael Waldron had seen it or at least read all the scripts before jumping into writing it. But we didn't get access to seeing it. I think maybe Sam had seen a couple of things, but Bob and I did not have access to it, I believe, until it came out. And then I have Disney Plus, so that's where I was jumping on. And you know now who my kids are, so we were watching it like every night right when it first aired. Like it's dropped. We have to go sit on the couch right now. But they were also giving us episodes of Marvel so we could watch them. And so to already be deep within this movie and then watch Wanda's story unfold in WandaVision and see how incredibly sympathetic she was of character. Like you're creating a character that even though what she's doing in WandaVision is wrong, she's taken over a town, she is brainwashed a bunch of people. So it's planting seeds. But also we're on her side as an audience and watching that movie. You're completely with her. You're with her pain. You're with her journey. So that was definitely, even though I'd already had some of my concerns with Wanda just from reading the script, watching WandaVision, suddenly after watching the finale of that show, I came into work and I was like, wow, we need to protect her because we can't have fans just absolutely angry at us. We need them along for this journey and they need to understand. And it was all in there, but it was more a matter of just tracking character throughout the movie, just tracking her and making sure that we never went too arch with her, never got too mustache twirly because she's big. I mean, Elizabeth Olsen killed it in this movie. She's phenomenal. But there are definitely moments where she has to be larger than life. And so it was just taking us one step back from going too far with that stuff, making sure that we kept her still to what she was in WandaVision.
So it's interesting hearing you talk about how part of your, as I put it, homework was actually watching Sam Raimi films. When you're co-editing with someone who has a ton of experience with the director, as Bob Murawski does with Sam Raimi, you're a first-time collaborator with that director. Do you look to that other editor to help navigate the process with Sam, just to give you some insight onto his process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this one was also a bigger challenge because they were shooting in the UK. I was here. In LA. So we were almost functioning as a 24-hour cutting room, which was great due to all the different locations of our visual effects vendors. So all of the different storyboard work and pre-visualization work that needed to be done before shooting some of the bigger action films. Some of that material would come in the middle of the night, the UK time, but we were still up here in LA. So I could assemble some of that stuff so that Sam could wake up and see it, or Bob could wake up and manipulate it or whatever, depending on whose scene and whose sequence it was. So our communications at that time were daily, constant Zoom meetings, which would happen in the UK when they wrapped. So it was like 7 p.m. for them. And I was just, starting my day. And emails back and forth with Bob, which was kind of the best way to communicate. And there I could kind of gather a sense and I was just watching whatever he was assembling on a constant basis. I was just following all of their discussions and seeing how things were, mostly in storyboard meetings, how the sequences were being discussed. And one of my very first meetings with Sam was a storyboard meeting on a sequence that I ended up editing, which is the Mindscape with Professor X. So basically, as the meeting began, we watched the storyboards. And basically, storyboards have been put together almost as an animatic. So it's looking like a very rough cartoon. You're seeing the motion, you're seeing all that kind of stuff. But I don't think any sound effects or anything like that at the time. Anyhow, it was very cool sequence. But then Sam complimented the artist and then said, okay, so here's what I'd like. Let's remove this. Let's add this over here. We can remove these 3 frames. What if there was a mist that comes in? And he just said like the really simple, very calm. And I'm seeing it in my mind, like, oh, how is he just knows intuitively what is going to make this better. And even though the sequence to me originally presented was creepy, Sam just picked out little things and put in little extra things and made it what it is right now, which is a very satisfying jump scare to watch with the audiences and just a really cool, bizarre sequence, something that with the Marvel movie action and all that stuff, you get a little bit of a breath for a moment in a very quiet space. So that already just tipped me off of like, here's someone who's watching everything. He just kind of knows so much of what he wants. So I felt like I did my best to kind of follow those guidelines with sound and building out jump scares. You don't do a lot of jump scares and I Feel Pretty, Like, I mean, you do maybe, I don't know.
Well, since you brought that up, I did want to take a quick tangent on the subject of directors. Because looking at your, as I like to call it, rich tapestry, Nora Ephron, James L. Brooks, Mike Nichols, Richard Donner, then the Russos, and now Sam Raimi. What is your process for sorting out how a director likes to work? I know in this case you had Bob and his history with Sam, but what is your process for getting to know a director and figuring out what your working relationship is going to be?
Usually, if I'm lucky enough to be hired early on, there are a number of meetings discussing script, seeing how open they are to notes and discussions of characters, scenes and things. If I see stuff just in reading a script that I feel like isn't servicing the story, and I know we'll be on the cutting room floor at some point, and I know that the director's grappling with schedule and money and everything else, I will enter into those discussions without saying, get rid of this is crap. I will kind of just step into it by saying, I can see where this may not be as valuable as how we're following the story, and see how open those people are to that kind of feedback. Some are so thankful, and most are so thankful and happy to collaborate. I think I've been really fortunate to work with a lot of directors who understand how important the editing process is, that this is where their movies are going to be made. This is where the storytelling happens, and they're going to be protected if things go wrong on the day, if they don't have the time to get everything. So those relationships that I've had have been very collaborative, which is phenomenal. So either it be a first-time director who needs a little hand-holding, or an established, like working with Nora Ephron on Bewitched. She'd made many, many movies. She had her style. We knew exactly what her style was. And I had done some additional editing on You've Got Mail, so I'd worked with her before. But I kind of say that we're the therapists as well. We're kind of there to guide them to where they need to be, but also in a safe and comfortable setting. That's egotistical, but it really does happen, because everyone in the process of making a film has those moments of insecurity. Oh my gosh, is this just crap? I think in my experience, I know I always have one or two of those screenings where we're testing it with an audience or something, where I just sit back and I go, oh no, what is this? It doesn't make any sense. I don't know what this movie is. And a lot of that is a product of just watching it too many times, cutting too many times, not having the ability to step back because you're so in it and you've got deadlines and stuff. So to be able to be that person for a director who can assure them, like, we will get there, but maybe we need to relook at the path, or let me show you some other versions, that sort of thing, just to make sure that they feel secure and comfortable in the space with me so we can move forward and tell the best story.
So to tell the best story, how were the editorial duties parsed out between you and Mr. Murawski?
Well, I think because both of us work mostly just as solo editors on things. When we started this, we had a conversation about that. And I said, I defer to you, Bob. You have worked with Sam for years and years and years. So whatever is going to help your process and ultimately the process of this movie, you let me know. I will take it from your lead. And so it wasn't, I did speak to, this is what I do, talking movies, comedies, character stuff. And I did get thrown a great deal of those scenes. I think there was one point where Bob emailed me and, was saying, hey, they shot this other conversation. You want to grab it? And he said, I don't think I will edit anyone talking and for the rest of this film, because he was doing a lot of the action stuff and of course the fantastic zombie strange stuff, which is just their wheelhouse completely. So he had a huge portion of the back end of the movie to tackle, and we were still trying to figure it all out. So I really was responsible for, I did have a few action scenes. Any of that Vishanti, we call Ditko Road world, is all me. So it's the start of the movie and stuff. I mean, all me. We're all doing it together. We're all doing the storyboards and previs stuff together. And I took it over since I did start the movie later than Bob. He had already done a lot of work on all those sections as well. So it was handed to me at some point early on when Bob had huge Kamar-Taj battle and all the back end Zombie Strange stuff to deal with. But the Strange and Christine relationship, that was handed to me early on. Their relationship at her wedding and reception. And then when they see each other again in the alternate universe, and just seeing through that chemistry between them up to the end scene where they have to say goodbye, that was definitely given to me, and I could use my history and experience to work on that. And then some America stuff, some early on, like the pizza scene and things. That's, again, my wheelhouse, the comedy, the banter. And it was important for me to also follow her as a character, because you've got such big characters and actors, and they've been in this Marvel universe for a while now, and she's a brand new somebody who's dropped in, and she's a 14-year-old, and she needs to hold her own and have a character and sympathy and not just be kind of running behind Strange. And so I did a lot of her stuff as well.
Well, with all of these alternate universes, I'd love to imagine there's a Nora Ephron cut version of this.
Well, there definitely is a longer reception. I think at some point we hadn't had a complete version of the opening scene, and we looked at just starting the movie with a much longer wedding reception and things. And it did feel like the Nora Ephron cut. You're just in this twinkly cocktail piano music and beautifully dressed people in a Manhattan setting. And it was like, wait a second, this feels a little different than the usual.
Well, I'd watch that one too.
Yeah, it was a sweet one.
I got to imagine you're doing some multicam editing when you're doing multiverse editing. There's got to be a lot of cameras going on. So just tell me a little bit about the amount of footage, the number of cameras you were working with, just the overall from production to dailies to you process.
I would say mostly 2 cameras going, sometimes 3, sometimes 1, depending on camera moves, stunts, etc., where other cameras would get in the way. But for the bulk of everything, there were 2 cameras running at all times. I feel like my mind has erased how much footage came in all the time, but it really was manageable. It wasn't overwhelming. I think that's the brilliance that I came to learn about Sam, is that he really plans. He's really prepared for what he's going to shoot that day. So if it's a big action sequence, he knows exactly what he wants to get. He's also, because of the amount of visual effects in these things, they have to plan that out with all the visual effects people to know what can they accomplish. So then really dialogue scenes, I think, got more quantity of footage, because it wasn't stunt things where you'd have to just do a short bit and then go and grab another short bit and piece it all together. With dialogue scenes, you could just let the camera roll and let all that stuff unfold. But it never felt like it was too much or overwhelming. There was a lot coming in at all times, but that's why Marvel always puts 2 editors onto these things, is so that we can each have each other's backs and really tackle all the stuff that's coming at us, because it's not just the footage that's coming at us. It's still more storyboards, and it's still more previs stuff just to prep for what's coming up in the future. So you're editing a lot more than just the movie when you're doing it.
We'll probably talk about the assistants at some point before we're done, but I made a note. I think one of them had a post online, I think on Instagram or something, about crazy frame rates in this film. I thought, I don't know what that means, but I'm going to ask to you. So why would some assistant say, oh, the crazy frame rates on this film?
I don't know. I'll have to ask that assistant. No, I do know. I think Sam plays a lot with frame rates to move a scene forward, to do tricky push-ins. There are things that we can do in post, but then it looks a little more like we've done it in post versus him doing it himself. So there were oftentimes we were shooting in 24. There were oftentimes 48 frame versions as well of stuff to be able to cut in between. Or when you took the 48 to 24, it would give it a slightly different look for action shots. But then Sam liked to dip into 23 sometimes to just make things feel like they're in real time and real speed, but they're secretly just a little faster. So you won't notice, but things will move along a little bit more. So if anything, that was probably where that comment came from, because it becomes a challenge for those who have to sync it up.
That would make sense.
Yeah.
As far as, this is a tough question to ask because you and Bob were working separately, as so often is the case these days. Was there an opportunity to somewhat observe his approach and see like, oh, he does something a little differently than I do, or to pick up a technique from him?
Yes, absolutely. Because I don't do as much action-based stuff, I was studying his approach to that on a constant basis. He has a couple of tricks that he likes to do, and one of them is a very slight repeat of action to kind of emphasize what's going on. So he'll sometimes cut between different camera angles of the same action, so you're actually seeing it multiple times, but you don't perceive that you're seeing it multiple times. A great example of that is when Doctor Strange is fighting Mordo. There's a couple of shots very early on. Mordo jumps off of this, a higher place that he's on, and he jumps down and he goes and swipes at Doctor Strange with his sword. And if you study the cut, you'll see there's, I think, 3 of those kind of coming at him things that move together so fluidly that you don't realize that it's the same action a couple of times, but it's creating more of an impact for the viewer, as opposed to if he'd made it fluid and it was just one swipe and hit. So that was fun to watch, and I certainly attempted it in a couple places. But he'd always joke about the American cut, which was cutting from wide to a slightly tighter version of something, which is something I've done before, but hit the fact that it's his terminology now, the American cut, though he may have gotten it from something else. So there were always like little tricks and things that like Sam would say, hey, Bob, do that thing. And so I was learning from both of them. A lot of our sessions early on also were, even when we came back and we were all in LA, were on Evercast or Clearview, which are 2 editorial based. Well, I think Evercast might be able to be used as any kind of team-based working system, but it did work with our Avid and Clearview as well. We could be editing and showing real-time cuts of our material over what is ultimately like a Zoom kind of experience, but we were in the rooms with each other. So as opposed to, which oftentimes happened when the studio came in, I would sit in Bob's room and we would trade off who went onto his computer. But when Sam was at his home and we were on our own Evercast systems, we could trade off just by pressing a button, and Sam could watch my screen or Sam could watch Bob's screen, and then we could give each other notes that way, which I think was great, because a lot of times I think what I hear is that the directors will sit in these multi-editor situations with one editor while the other editor is doing something else, and then the directors will move to that editor's room. So you really don't get as much experience looking at each other's process. You see the results of each other's process. But so this was great to be able to watch that and have Bob watch my process and us be able to give notes and feedback like that.
Well, and to be clear, were Bob here, I would absolutely ask, what did you pick up from Tia? Because I'm sure you could teach him a thing or two.
Possible.
I skipped over something that I want to go back to really quick. In our discussion about Sam's approach to shooting, the visual style that he likes to employ, I also read that he likes to encourage improvisation. I wondered if that was something that you noticed on this particular film and how it was something you may or may not have worked with in the Avid, using things like ScriptSync or anything like that.
Well, I've got a couple of answers to that because I do come from the world of everything is improv. I mean, most every movie I work with directors who like to improv, either they were comedy writers and they will write alternates. So that's not necessarily improv. Or my last two movies were Ben Falcone, Melissa McCarthy movies. So their cast of character friends and so you just watch those people riff. So with Sam and this, there was some improv, but really because of our tight schedule and because of our need to be so true to certain story points and the visual effects demands and all that kind of stuff, it didn't feel like there was as much ad lib going on, as much as there were a lot of script discussions. So Michael Waldron was always on the set. Because of COVID, there were certain scenes that weren't able to be filmed in the original film shoot. So Marvel always builds in an additional photography beat, like a month or something like that, so that you can pick up things that you missed or really polish certain scenes if we realize after testing and watching with audiences that we haven't touched on certain things. We need to be clearer about stuff. We need to explore a character a little bit more, whatever it is. So I was able to then really watch the process so much more than I was when they were shooting in the UK because they shot here in LA. And so we were a part, Bob and I, of the process with the studio, with our producer, Richie Palmer, with Michael Waldron, and with Sam on reading down the pages of what are we going to shoot? What can we do what have we learned about the scenes that we haven't shot yet that we can now put into them to make them work for what we've learned the film is, what the film is telling us it wants to be, and also working on additional scenes and additional dialogue. So a lot of the alternates got worked out in those writers' rooms, and Michael would make a page of things. And so then Sam on the set would choose his favorites from the page. Sometimes Benedict would choose his favorites. Sometimes Benedict would do some of his own adds to that, which have gotten in the movie as well. So different than my experience with the comedy writers and comedians, where you don't even realize it's coming and all of a sudden they're off on a tangent. And then you don't have coverage on the other side because you already shot the other side of the actor. And then you have to figure out how do I make an entire scene work when I don't have any of the other person's responses. So we weren't doing that as much on this, but there was definitely the ability to have alternate lines of dialogue just to safeguard ourselves in case we found audiences didn't either buy a certain line or they wanted to know more about something. These fans, they know everything. So you kind of have to safeguard yourself in case everyone raises their hand and says, well, in the last version of blah, blah, blah. So.
Well, they will.
They do. Yeah.
Well, it's funny you bring that up because something that was impressed upon me way early on by editors is that organization is key. Like the battle is won or lost in the field of organization in the cutting room. And, on a I don't want to say a regular film, but I'm going to say a regular film, a dialogue film, a rom-com, the plot lines don't get that complex. I guess they could. But on a Marvel movie, and now a multiverse Marvel movie, just keeping track of all the different where am I, where should I be, where am I going stuff, just seems like a lot of mental overhead. And I wondered if you had any techniques, any tools that you use to keep track of story arc, where you should be at any point, things like that.
Really, the biggest help for me is just to keep watching it. I will continually just watch down the reels to make sure that, because you will be blindsided at a certain point where you get so used to your material and you watch it with an audience and you go, oh my gosh, we lost the dialogue early on in this scene, but then we talk about something that which we no longer say in this later scene and we're just so used to everything. So that is kind of key. We have, at least I work with scene cards. So it's my assistants will usually take an image that's a fairly prominent image from a scene and put it on, I think it's like a 4x6, I don't know, size card. They'll print it out with a little description of whatever the scene is and whatever our like kind of catchphrase of whatever we're calling the scene. Vishanti Temple, Gargantos, wedding reception, these sort of things on there. And I'll have it on a wall in order, real order, scene order. And then when we're discussing where should things go, can we rejuggle scenes? Can we lose a scene and what will it do? I'm always looking at that wall as my movie to see what am I not thinking of that it might impact if we literally take that card off the wall. So that is a huge help for me. Any kind of continuity like that. We always also have a printed out paper continuity. But for me, being a visual person, it's just better for me to take a look at a wall behind me. But made certain zooms that weren't Marvel Disney film zooms tricky because I'd have to figure out how to move my laptop so no one could see that wall because you can't give it away. You can't see images from this film.
No, that wouldn't be good.
Yeah.
Hearing you talk about the fans being able to pick apart certain things if you didn't get them just right jogged my memory to the discussion I had with, again, our friend Jeff Ford and Lee Folsom Boyd for Spider-Man No Way Home. The topic was Easter eggs.
Yeah.
Because obviously that's a whole meta part of these Marvel films. And Jeff was saying that they actually had like a guide from the director and from other Marvel people, like, okay, these are the things we're going to work in and this is how they worked. Right. Was there anything like that involved here for this film?
For this film, it was more Sam Raimi Easter eggs. There's, I guess, a Buick, I believe, that's in all of his films. That's in and I could be getting the car wrong. I'm the wrong person. Where's Bob? Bob. But it's when they go to that Sinister Strange universe. It's one of the cars that's just floating behind them. Obviously, Bruce Campbell, eye push-ins, things like that. So those are like the little Sam Raimi Easter eggs. Because we're dealing with different universes, we could kind of be original with certain things with this film. I mean, there were, in terms of Easter eggs, really wasn't those, we didn't have those kind of conversations. It was really more just protecting things, not going so beyond what a character would do that fans would explode. But we were able to play with all the characters because it was different universes. So there was kind of a freedom. And I think that Kevin Feige, Richie Palmer, they wanted to give Sam the freedom to make his own movie, not tie him to certain specific things that had to be put in. I would assume since John Watts has done now all those Spider-Man movies, there were certain things that he did want to call back, but we didn't have a list or anything going on. They were just things that Sam always does in his movies.
Well, it's almost second nature for films like these to focus a lot of the discussion on the visuals. And clearly sound plays as important a role. So we should talk about your approach to sound in terms of design and temping and monitoring. Your normal process may have been challenged by the pandemic and the remote workflow, but do you typically like to, we'll start with the monitoring. Are you a stereo, LCR, or 5.1 type of gal?
Usually, if I can do 5.1, that is the best for movies like this, even though you're really working in LCR most of the time. But in my dialogue movies, it's usually just LCR. And in this movie, for the temp soundtrack, I have to give a ton of credit to my assistant, Kim Boritz. She was also on Captain Marvel. She is a sound design genius for the temp stuff. So she followed Bob and I, and she took from other Marvel movies. We'll have a library that actually, I should add to the question of earlier of how do we keep organized with this stuff. We have a library of important Marvel movies that would pertain to our film. So we have them in a bin on the Avid so we can pull them up whenever we need to. And fortunately, we have their sound stems. So we can just pull up the sound effects stem and get all the Doctor Strange magic. Plus, there are bins upon bins of all of those characters' sound effects in a vast, amazing Marvel library. So she will build stuff out initially from that material. Bob and I do, on this film at least, have done a preliminary pass on sounds, and then Kim would follow us and really just fill it out. And then that worked kind of as a guideline. Sam would give us notes on things, sounds that he'd want to hear, but also early on, we brought on, Sam and Bob have worked on many films with a sound designer named UC. And UC and Addison Teague and Katie Wood, who are our sound supervisors, were also working on the side to create the sounds of these specific universes and things. And this movie was just, there were so many pieces and we were moving so fast to get everything together that we didn't get the chance to really spend as much time with those sound designers as we would have liked. But they were creating all that stuff and feeding us things for our screenings, our temp screenings for audiences, so that once we got to the stage, there was some familiarity with what the sound was going to be. But then like I described with Sam and the storyboards, it was phenomenal watching him on the soundstage. He is on the stage all day. He's listening to every single sound. And there would be times where the sound team would play. Sam would say, okay, take away the dialogue and the music. I want to just hear the sound effects you've got for this particular moment. Let's say it's an explosion. And we'd go through every sound effect. And there would be times where I would be hard pressed to know the difference between sound effects. Like this goes clang and this goes clang. And it's pretty much the same. But Sam knew which clang worked for the moment, what was going to read through the music that he had there at the time, the dialogue that we needed to hear. And he just did his own design and shape. And it was phenomenal to watch. So if you're appreciating that in watching the movie and you can hear where the sounds are going, I highly recommend listening to it in all formats if you can.
Hearing you talk about Sam isolating certain sounds, that reminded me of one of the things I think must be most challenging about working in this surround immersive audio model, and especially films like this, is that finding some kind of separation. In other words, the clarity, making sure that those things do come through. You can back yourself into a corner where you just build things up so much that you lose the real beauty of a lot of those sounds.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just the wall of noise. And there were moments where we were definitely, and this is not to criticize any of the sound design, it's just you have so much you want to do in a moment. And you've got someone like Danny Elfman who's creating an amazing score. And so you're grappling with, do you feature that amazing music, but you have to feature this creature. We need to feel the threat of whatever's coming after America Chavez, or even the difference of A New Universe. So the balance of, oh my gosh, I really want to hear this music. It's so great, but I can't hear this bizarre background Doppler effect car thing that we're doing in this second universe. So again, Sam, brilliant, but knowing, let's keep Danny music to here. Let's pull it out for this moment. Let's put it back in. Can we put it back in? Maybe remove one or two of the instruments so we can feature more of the sound effects, or vice versa. Yeah, it is a real challenge. And I have seen many action movies in the past in the theaters, not Marvel movies, where I feel like I wish they had stripped some of that out so that I could really experience the moment, because at a certain point, the sound can get accosting. So you want to be able to make sure you're not doing that. You want to create a big moment, but you don't want to make your audience want to leave the theater.
No, you don't.
No.
We talked a bit at the beginning about just how many films come before this that lead up to this. And there's got to be people that come in and like, I've never seen a Marvel movie before. I'm watching Doctor Strange for the first time ever. So in those audience screenings, did you find that a lot of the things that you had to go back and look at again were story logic related? Were they Easter egg related? If you could generalize, what was a lot of the post-screening work about?
Definitely story and character related. We early on had our friends and family in to test. So usually in these test screenings, they bring in Disney employees because they know that there's built-in NDAs and people aren't going to go running around telling all the secrets of the Marvel Universe. We were fortunate, because this is a process that Sam does, to be able to, like, I could bring my family and some friends, and Bob brought his family and friends, and Sam and, Richie Palmer, and we all gathered people. And of course, my people are all Marvel fanatics. So they were riding that line of, are we following the characters that the fans have wanted to see? And Bob had a handful of people who had never seen any of these Marvel movies. And that was incredibly helpful, because we needed to know, does this movie play as a standalone? And if it doesn't, what can we put in there? What information can we have the characters deliver that will allow it to be a standalone moment? I mean, the people who did see this and had never seen anything before, very early on understood, here's a woman who was a mother and she lost her children. They don't know why, they don't know how, and she wants to get them back. And that was very clear for them. So they didn't have to watch all of WandaVision. They didn't have to watch Infinity War and see Wanda take down Vision. They didn't need to see any of that to read her pain. And so that was very satisfying, because you don't want to make a movie and have people have to do like the summer reading before they go to see that film, because then they won't go see it. And there are a lot of Sam Raimi fans that may not necessarily have seen Marvel movies before. And I think Sam wanted to speak to those audiences as well. And as filmmakers, I think we all want to make a movie that is a standalone, even if it is in a series of movies. So that was a lot of what we were following in those screenings. A lot of it was, do you understand this character? If you'd never seen anything before, do you understand where this character has started and what their journey is? And does the story itself make sense to tell you those characters and those journeys?
Is there a particular scene that you cut that, looking back, you consider your favorite or you had the most fun working on?
There are a lot of them. There's one section that I love watching over and over again, just because it ended up, Danny Elfman did an amazing score to it, and it makes me super happy. Which is when and this is a kind of a combo platter of me and Bob, but when they end up in the alternate universe and they're sitting at the sanctum with Mordo, and Mordo starts to talk about dream walking. I am responsible for that montage of all the multi-layered things, which, by the way, is so cool in 3D. So go see it in 3D. And Danny put music to that. And then Bob takes over when they come out for the drugged up portion of it. And then I take over again when we go to Wanda and she's going through her little multiverse orbs to get to the house. And then Bob comes in to do the possession because, of course, Bob and Sam Raimi. But Danny did some amazing, crazy, dirty guitar riffs and things. And so the way that Bob and I were able to trade off and work together in that, and just, it doesn't feel like anything you've seen in a Marvel movie ever. And mostly with like these guitar riffs and Wanda just being this sort of, rock witch goddess. It just makes me super happy. And then doing the pizza scene, I did the pizza to the rooftop, and that became kind of a complicated thing because when we were working on the America Chavez character, we wanted to give her some more character development. And so the rooftop with the dead body, that was a scene that had been something else turned into a much bigger scene on the rooftop. We were thinking of possibly getting rid of the pizza scene. At a certain point, we screened without the pizza and realized we'd lost some of the sense of humor. But now we have the same dialogue in both scenes. And so Kevin suggested, can you figure out a way to have both of them? And so, I go back to the Avid, back to the drawing board, and have to figure out how to get the conversation to work so that you're not repeating dialogue in both things. You're not repeating, but you're still having the key moments you need from both scenes. So I did it, worked well into the night, presented the next day, and everyone's like, wow, hey, that really works. How about if we start the pizza scene in the middle? So suddenly, not only do I have to still protect the things that I can't have overlap, but now I have to figure out how to go from the middle and get backwards to some of the stuff from the beginning of the pizza and still not overlap with ideas that we have in the rooftop. So I'm very proud of the final product of that because it was a huge challenge.
Since to me, editors are superheroes, I want to talk about your origin story. Early on, we talked about Nora Ephron and James L. Brooks and Mike Nichols and Richard Donner. That's quite a roster. Yeah. And just, this is a tough question to put on you, but looking at those directors, anything that stands out to you that you learned from any one of them? I'm sure it's all of them and everything, but something you can really just say, this was a key moment for me working with that particular director.
I think when I introduce myself to directors, I say, first and foremost, I am a character editor. That is what I learned from all of those directors. And really my mentor, an editor named Richard Marks, who worked with all of them. And he was so good at following the characters throughout the story. It's very easy to get lost in, does this scene work to this scene, work to this scene? And you can lose the characters. To be able to protect those actors, make sure that whatever performances you're choosing are always keeping along the lines of the characters, but also making them feel authentic and genuine, and weeding out the more actory moments, like really being able to read something that feels authentic versus something that feels like a line read. That I have to give credit to Richard Marks. That and those directors absolutely showed me, because it gave us the material to look at so that he could teach me these lessons. But I really learned all of that from him. And Jeff Ford also worked with Richie Marks. And I think that's why Jeff brought me on Endgame. He knew that that was my pedigree and that I would be protecting those characters in that film, which is so much more about character than big action sequences.
Your editor's intuition is on full display because the next question was Richard Marks. So excellent work there. And I guess the only thing left, since we are talking about the multiverse, if there is a second universe, what is Tia Nolan doing in that universe?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question, because I kind of love what I do. It has changed a number of times. I think there was a period of time where it would be a teacher, like with kids, younger kids. I think maybe that's what Alt Me is doing. And then if it's the alt me that needs to face my fears, like Doctor Strange has to, I am a flight attendant. So I do not like to fly.
Well, I think that's a perfect answer. And if you have time to get down to work on the Nora Ephron cut of Multiverse of Madness, that would be awesome.
I will be releasing that shortly.
The multiverse. What a concept. Personally, I'd like to think there's an alternate universe where this podcast still exists, but that host is capable of getting through an interview without making about 40 mistakes that have to be edited out later on. But in this universe, you got me hosting it, and the mistakes will go on and on. Now, I may be a work in progress, but there is no doubt that Tia Nolan is one of the best, and a powerful force for good in the cutting room of any universe. So please join me in thanking Tia for making some time to tell us about cutting Marvel's latest blockbuster. Hey, if you've got some blocks to bust, I can tell you that Avid Media Composer is the very nonlinear editing system found throughout all of Marvel's universes. And it's never been easier or a better time to make it part of yours. There are new features being introduced all the time, so check out avid.com to see what's new and to get yourself a low-cost monthly or annual subscription. All right, I hope you enjoyed this 2-week foray into the MCU. Where to next? I guess we'll have to take a sharp left turn into something different. So buckle up and we'll see where that is. Until then, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.